again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm Jack, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a great topic for you today, so let's get right to it. People who have survived an attempted murder. How did it happen? How did you survive? Please remember to like, share, have a happy Halloween, and subscribe. Someone tried to rob my store during a Psychotic episode. He trashed the place, tried to crack open my head with a 16-inch bong, and stripped naked as I was ejecting him. Then he drove a Jeep through the wall and tried to run me over. The counter I stood behind all day stopped the Jeep. I left through the massive hole he left in the wall. I was attacked by my neighbor's teenage son during a drug-induced psychosis. He came to the door asking for help. I stepped outside as he was pointing back to his place, saying someone was trying to get him. I quickly realized he wasn't making sense, and as I started moving back towards the door, he started screaming about why no one was helping him. He got really angry and started screaming he was going to kill us all. I ran back in the door and felt him hit me twice. I locked the door and grabbed my phone to call the police. He was still yelling and moving back and forth between my place and his. It wasn't until police arrived and detained him that I went back outside. That was when I realized I wasn't just sweating from fear, but my entire back was soaked in blood. What I thought were punches were actually him stabbing me twice. Very ugly stars, but fortunately no long-term damage. A friend of mine had a good story where he moved into a new flat in Birmingham. He went to bed on the first night and woke up to some guys trying to kick his door down. He scrambled to the hallway to hold the door up. They had bats and knives and were swinging at him through the gap in the door that was no longer on its hinges. He started shouting at them, and they immediately stopped and replied, "Who's that?" He replied with his name. A moment of silence fell, followed by, "Sorry mate, wrong flat." Good thing he woke up. We assume the flat he moved into was previously let by a drug dealer, I assume. They wanted to murder him in his sleep. My mother's husband got home drunk and tried to kill me 3 times in the same day. We got in a fist fight. I was 12 at the time. He pulled out a knife, I ran, and he chased me with his car. Thankfully, by pure chance, my uncle was going to my house at that moment, saw what was happening, and without thinking twice, slammed his Dodge Ram into my stepfather's car. Hadn't he showed up, I would probably be dead by now. Funny thing is that my mother's still married to the asshole. I was shot during an attempted carjacking. Car chase ensued. Police caught up to them. They skipped bail. FBI found them 4 states away 2 years later, 21-year sentence for both. To answer the bail question, I have no idea how they got bail. They were on a crime spree, robbed several people at gunpoint that same evening. When we showed up for the trial as witnesses for the prosecution, we were told they skipped bail. By the time they caught up to them, our testimony was no longer required. My crazy religious aunt tried to drown me in the bathtub when I was 11. She walked in on me bathing and just shoved my head down and kept it there. I would have died if my younger sister hadn't walked in on the whole thing and tackled my aunt. Mind you, my sister was 7, and I was abnormally small for her age. She saw the entire thing and quickly realized what was happening. After stopping my aunt, she grabbed me, then ran to my dad, who was asleep, to wake him up. At first, he couldn't believe what was going on, and my aunt used the excuse of I was bathing him and he slipped. But there was no reason for her to bathe me, and my sister and I kept insisting on what happened until my aunt cracked and said that I had the devil in me and that I wasn't pure blood. Dad married someone from a different country, so I'm mixed, and she hated all of us. Dad called the police, and my aunt confessed that she was going to start with me and then go after the rest of my 5 siblings in order to purify the family line. It's been 18 years, and she's still locked up in the cuckoo house and constantly saying that she's going to finish what she started. My ex recently, at the time, always was getting on me about teaching her to shoot. I never did. She grabbed my own gun out of storage while she was attacking me while she was blackout drunk. She loaded it and pulled the slide back far enough to cock the striker, but not quite far back enough to chamber a round. She stuck it right in my face when she came back into the room and pulled the trigger. That was the greatest click I've ever heard. I'm very glad that that worked out for you, because that is end-of-life type stuff, so that click must have felt great, but too bad it had to happen. When I was 9, an older kid held me underwater at a public pool trying to drown me. I fought back best I could for what felt like forever. Ran out of air and started to black out. Had the time to think, yep, this is it. My lungs at that point felt like they were on fire. and as I went unconscious, the last thing I remember is inhaling water. My older brother saw what was happening and got the guy off me and dragged me out of the pool. I came to coughing up water. All the adults and lifeguards chalked it up to kids playing, but the kid had told me days prior, in an incredibly matter-of-fact, bone-chilling way, that someday he was going to kill me. He was trying to make good on that. My brother and I were sound asleep, and unbeknownst to us, my mother decided to leave my father. She woke my brother and I up at 3 in the morning in a panic. My father was a heroin addict and not prone to the best decisions. Whilst my mother was loading us into the car, father went for his rifle. As we were driving away into the darkness, and we heard shots fired. My mother just kept driving as fast as she could. We didn't realize until the next morning that there was a bullet hole in the rear bumper and in the driver's side rear panel. Not me, but there were 2 boys who I guess didn't get along with each other in my home ec class in 8th grade. One was kind of an average lanky kid. The other was a huge 6-foot-something guy who was always getting in trouble at school. I have no idea what prompted this, but one day when we were all working on a sewing project making pillows, the big dude suddenly came up behind the lanky kid with a pair of rusty kitchen shears and tried to slit his throat. Fortunately, they weren't sharp at all, so although the kid bled a lot, he ended up being fine. The teacher had no idea what to do. She was middle-aged and shorter than most of us, so she just kept screaming at the guy until he tried to bolt from the school. Police caught him a bit down the street, and we didn't see him for a few years until one day he just showed up our junior year of high school in the middle of the year. The other kid's parents immediately pulled him from school, understandably, and it was only a couple of months before the big dude eventually got expelled for having drugs at school. Wow. I'm a recovering drug addict. A few of us were using together, and he was getting more and more paranoid. Thought someone was stealing his drugs, meth. Demanded everyone strip naked so he could inspect our clothes and find his supposedly missing crystal. He got to me, I told him F off, and he started stabbing me. Stabbed me 7 times before I overpowered him and beat him semi-unconscious. I went to the hospital, then rehab, then sober living, then I found a new way to live, clean and sober. Haven't risked being stabbed since. Feels pretty insignificant considering there are people here that have been shot, stabbed, etc., but here goes. My dad tried to choke me to death at 18, the culmination of years of violence directed at me. He'd hired a private investigator to follow my mom, who divorced him 2 years earlier. I told him the decent thing to do would be to leave her alone and move on. He went purple in the face and launched at me, throwing his hands around my throat. For a split second, I thought he was doing the old Homer Simpson, throttling, nothing more. But I quickly realized he was forcing his thumbs down onto my windpipe with intent. I felt my eyes bulging in my sockets, so I brought my knee up to his stomach as hard as I could, broke free and left the house. Spent the next few months sleeping in underground car parks and ditches until a friend found out and took me in. He's never apologized. He's never so much as acknowledged it. I was leaving my ex. When I went to leave the room after packing up my stuff, he grabbed me and threw me against the wall. I hit the wall, fell onto my hands and knees, and he picked me up by the throat and started choking me. I had a moment of clarity and remembered he had a rugby injury and his nose was sensitive, so I punched him, broke that mother effer nose. He dropped me, and I legged it. Had a crazy violent ex-boyfriend who kidnapped me at knife point. He would shoot meth and lose his grip on reality, literally. Beat me because he was convinced I was cheating on him with ghosts and shadow people. I finally was able to break up with him, but he found me, forced me into his car at knife point, drove me out a back road and beat me from sunup to sundown. Then he drove me back to his house where the violence continued until he choked me out, until I pissed myself and woke up the next day. Effing creep actually cuddled up to me after he put me out. At one point, he put a loaded gun to my temple, told me to close my eyes and think about all of the bad things I've done in my life and why I deserve to die. But I didn't. All I thought about was my daughter, people I loved, people I hadn't seen in years, and just happy thoughts. I couldn't tell if 30 seconds went by or 5 minutes. And then he pulled the trigger. Mother effer shot it right past my face, blew a hole through his wall. I thought my eardrums were busted. Fast forward a lot of trauma to how I escaped. He ran out of meth, and I talked him into driving me to town. He lived an hour in the country. And taking me to my doctor's appointment, I was on Suboxone at the time, doing an outpatient, but they also had an inpatient program, and convinced him that I would go and get my script, sell them, and buy him more heroin. I told him I would forget everything that happened and we'd just have fun. He stopped on the way and bought some concealer and actually took me. I get there, run inside, and explained what happened as fast as I could, and they locked the doors, called the cops, and admitted for inpatient to save my life. I fell asleep once they got me in a room and slept for 3 days straight due to the concussions. But F him, I lived, and he's facing felonious assault, kidnapping, and rape with a deadly weapon. Very happy to hear that you got out of that very dangerous and life-threatening situation. Smart, and you did what you could to survive, and you did. And you can go to hell. My mom tried to kill me multiple times. Once she tried to smother me. Once during a psychotic episode, tried to drive our car off of a bridge. Once left me in our burning apartment building. The scariest time was when I was about 12 and I woke up in the middle of the night to her on top of me, pressing her knees into my chest so I couldn't breathe. It lasted about 4 or 5 hours of me fading in and out of consciousness. The whole time, she was just letting me and telling me how badly she wished I was dead. How nobody would remember my existence, holding my arms down and spitting on my face. I eventually talked her out of it, and she sobered up, I think. My alarm went off, and then I had to go to school. We shared a bedroom, but from that day forward, I always waited until she was asleep before I could go to bed in the living room. She committed suicide when I was 15. I found her body. I always thought she would kill me first. My dad tried to drown me when I was 8. He held my head underwater. He thought that me passing out was me dying. He started yelling at me when he realized I was alive. I still had some water in my lungs though, and got treated for dry drowning when I went back to my mom's a few days later. Another time he choked me. He let go when I pissed myself because of the choking. He didn't like that he got piss on him. I don't know if he was trying to kill me here, but he also slammed my head into a desk once. I just got a concussion and thankfully nothing more serious. I think the only reason I'm alive is that I have one heck of a guardian angel that definitely deserves a raise. Honestly, there were so many times my father would have killed me. He's an alcoholic and schizophrenic, so it was really scary times. I'm not sure how I survived them all, just did my best to run and hide and wait it out. My mother always told me off for locking doors, as he would break them down anyways if he wanted to. I used to climb far up trees to avoid being stabbed and would stay there for hours. I was very accepting of death or being severely injured. I thought if something happened to me, he'd be taken away and everyone else would be safe. I was willing to sacrifice myself. I'm glad he's out of the picture now, though. This is more of an almost. Falling out with a roommate over a girl. All of our friends took my side and saw him being the asshole, so he lost everybody. He came home furiously drunk when I was sound asleep and was seen by our third roommate scrambling through the kitchen drawers. I woke up to 8 stab marks in my bedroom wall. I guess he changed his mind. Family member I lived with had a mental breakdown. I ended up being their caretaker. They were regularly violent with me and wouldn't take meds. One day they attacked me again and just didn't stop. I knew I was going to die if I didn't get out of there. Somehow I managed to get out from under them and I bolted. Left everything behind and didn't look back. A neighbor saw me and took me somewhere safe. I still have nightmares about it. I was riding a mountain bike in a bald eagle protection area, kind of like a miniature national park with trails and stuff. Bald eagles are super protected in my country with prison for killing them and massive fines for even having a feather. I rode out of some trees and on the other side of the river, there's a guy sitting on a truck with his friends shooting at eagles. He started shooting at me and I turned around and rode back into the trees. The river was pretty wide, so I don't know how much danger I was in, but all I could do was leave. I didn't have a cell phone, which was pretty normal back then, and probably wouldn't have service out there anyway. For all I know, they probably got away with it or killed an eagle. My mother, when I was young, her and my crazy abusive stepdad were having an argument over the phone. He had left the house and she put all of us kids in the car and was driving like a maniac trying to find him. The road she had taken was a back road with a bunch of curves and blind turns, as that's the way semis would take because they would get to their destinations through the small towns, I guess, so had a detour. He would just leave walking as he was a truck driver and would park in the fields at the end of the houses and just walk there. She was driving crazy and we were all terrified. I'm not sure what kind of comment he made on the other end, but she responded with, "You don't like my kids? I'll only want to be with you. I'll get rid of them if you want. I'll drive off these curves right now." She began swerving horribly, and my younger siblings began crying hard. They were little and didn't have car seats, so they were thrown around pretty hard. I was then the biggest one, so still got a little hurt, but the seatbelt managed to hold me. It was super traumatic, and I can still recall that night in pieces. I don't even know how we made it home safely that night, but I would count that as attempted murder. If somehow the original poster hears this, I would love a follow-up. Is there still a relationship with your mom? Is she still with that guy? Do your siblings have a relationship with her? Terrible. Sorry. I was like 10 and on a walk to my house with my friend T, who was also like 10, who was on her bike. We lived in Arizona at the time, so it was hot and I was annoyed and tired, but we were talking. Well, as we were about 5 minutes from home, me and T passed a man who was walking on the same sidewalk, just the other way, and I didn't pay him any attention until he asked if we knew where a restaurant was, so me and T turned to him and started telling him where it was. As I was talking, I wasn't paying much attention to him because I was tired, until T started to make a noise kind of like crying, so I looked at her to see that she was crying, and then I look at where she was looking to see that the man was holding a knife and pointing it at me, and before I could say anything, he demanded that we give him our valuables, and instantly T started to do it, but I tried to explain to him that I didn't have anything valuable on me, but apparently he wasn't up for talking, as he stabbed me in the side, and then grabbed T, who was screaming, and stabbed her too. After laying on the sidewalk bleeding for a while, not sure how long, I had apparently passed out. Well, my memory comes back when I was in the hospital. I had been stabbed in my side, cutting my spleen, but when a person saw us on the sidewalk, she called the cops. I made it out with stitches and a partial splenectomy and 2 less pairs of shoes, along with some memory loss, but T had been stabbed in her gut, which cut her bowel, causing her to get septic, and she died in the hospital. We moved a year later. I wasn't the target, but I witnessed it. For some reason, our neighborhood grocery store used to be aggressively targeted by shoplifters who would just walk in wearing a baggy coat, hide as many booze bottles under it as possible, and then walk outside fast and drive away. I still don't know why they targeted this particular grocery store, but it was happening multiple times a week. At one point, it was just pretty demoralizing to be standing in line waiting to pay full price for groceries and watch people just walking out with arms load of free stuff. One day, the store manager got fed up and followed one of the regular shoplifters out into the parking lot yelling something like, "Come on, what the hell? Stop doing this," or something. And the shoplifter just got into their car and without hesitation gunned the engine and drove straight at the store manager at full speed in broad daylight in front of several witnesses, and then made a U-turn and drove away. Luckily, the manager was able to jump out of the way in time. It was like 10 a.m. on a weekday. It still boggles my mind that some people would commit attempted murder in broad daylight over like $50 worth of grocery store booze.